That's it. My time is up. I could talk for hours. As you can gather, I'm very passionate about this and related subjects. I want to leave you with the following thoughts. I truly believe that I have presented you today with incontrovertible evidence of a massive global hydraulic event coupled with massive tectonic happenings. Exactly how it happened, whether there was a comet or something else, that's second order stuff. The fact is, there has been a flood. I've given you some thoughts about coming judgment. I ask you please to seriously think about that. There's a choice, there's a fork in the road. You can reject what I say and continue going down whatever road you're going down. Or you can pause and ask the question. Is there really a creator? And yes, I can't explain where he came from, but it's no more difficult than assuming that all of this stuff around us came from nowhere. It's kind of roughly the same level of faith, I think. Actually, I find it easier to believe there is a creator. And then that there has been a series of judgments. And therefore there is a reasonable possibility that there could be one last judgment. How are you going to live the rest of your life? Depending on which fork you take, could be a momentous decision. If you want more information, contact details are on the screen. Thank you for spending this time with me. In summing up, I'm going to review the entire presentation. For those of you who want to contact me, you can contact me at james@etimin.org or the phone or fax numbers on the screen. In the introduction, we introduced Northcliffe as a landmark for judgment as the pivot point for this whole presentation. And posed the question, was the topography we see today formed over millions of years, or was it the result of a sudden catastrophic event? And asked the question, how did we explain the mountains and the valleys? We looked at bridges and said that engineers do not design bridges to stand up, they design them not to fall down, and I suggested for your consideration that your theory of topographic formation, your theory of the formation of the earth, your theory of where people came from, should be robust and subject to scrutiny, should stand up and not fall down. I suggested that you checked your theories and see whether it was tantamount to jumping off the top of a high-rise building, flapping your arms and crying, "I can fly," as you plunge to your death, or conjuring a rabbit out of a hat, or whether there was greater substance into what you believed about the topography that you see around you. I presented some of my credentials and made the assertion that I was talking with first-hand knowledge and experience about the formation of rocks, and a variety of the other aspects of this presentation that I was talking about was not theoretical. We had a look at some results from my PhD research and noticed that the characteristics of every single test result was nonlinear, frequently exponential. And I made the assertion that it is in fact so, that the vast majority of physical phenomena in the world follow nonlinear characteristics. We looked at a fundamental principle that extrapolation should be avoided and suggested that any form of extrapolation going back beyond where records existed had to be viewed with suspicion. I made the assertion that extrapolation of over millions or billions of years was invalid, taking account of nonlinear characteristics, that it was tantamount to an ant on a railway track, claiming to know where the train had come from, how long it took, and the route it followed. We had a look at some images from NASA with regard to deep space. We looked at the birth of stars and a 3 light-year high pillar of gas that you see there. Notice the instability, the continuous movement. We saw Comet Lulin, a dirty snowball, a mass of ice, only 160 times further away than the moon. In other words, close. And we postulated that such a comet could fly by or even impact the Earth and melt and cause a flood. We looked at massive chunks of ice in the Kuiper Belt just outside the solar system and postulated that one of those could easily get dislodged and strike the Earth or come close to hitting it. And we saw a crater on Mars which seemed to have the characteristics which would be consistent with a strike by an ice object. We saw that catastrophic and dramatic change is fast and not gradual. And I suggested for your consideration that everything that we were looking at in this presentation was likely to have happened quickly. We then had a look at the South African gold mines and saw that they were comprised of very hard metamorphosed rock which dipped at 30 degrees and outcropped on Northcliffe and other areas with glass-like vitrified ceramic quartzite, extremely hard rock. We had a look at the stratigraphic column of the gold mining reserves, which is typically about 2 kilometers deep, and noted that the volume of water required for such uniform deposition is huge, and that there had to be massive water forces to have brought that material from somewhere. We noted also that the deepest mines were over 4 kilometers deep, and that was 2 kilometers below sea level, indicating again massive disruption of the surface. We looked at the 30 degrees dip of the gold mining of the gold reefs and questioned how that had happened, how these horizontally deposited layers could have been upthrust like that. We looked at the geology of the surface of the Witwatersrand and saw how massively complex it was and how it spoke of massive surface disruption. And then we looked at a cross-section of the ore reserves, noting that not only did it dip at 30 degrees, but it was intersected with faults thrusting up and down all over the place, indicating massive turmoil and trauma of the Earth's surface. And then we saw that the top of that had been cut off and that horizontally bedded material had been laid down on top of it. We then had a look at sedimentary rock around the world, water-laid rock. We looked at Table Mountain in Cape Town, seeing that its horizontal layers just ended up in the middle of nowhere, just cut off on the sides. We looked at the Fish River Canyon and saw massive deposits of horizontally bedded material with massive canyons incised into it. We saw similar characteristics at Niagara Falls and the Grand Canyon on an even more dramatic scale. Notice the horizontal layers. We saw that massive wave action can move huge volumes of material very rapidly, as evidenced by this storm in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. From there we moved on to the Halfway House Granite Dome, noted that the Earth has a molten core that on occasion has upthrust to the surface. We saw that a dome is a massive granite intrusion, as evidenced by the circular pink zone in the map on the right. We saw graphically how the dome had upthrust and forced up the horizontally bedded layers containing the gold and formed that into the vitreous ceramic quartzite that we find today. We noted that this was consistent with a thin crust and that this was consistent with progressive cooling and solidifying of the Earth from the outside in. We noted that the characteristics of quartzite were very similar to the characteristics of hard ceramic floor tiles, and the brittleness indicated that the rock could only have been deformed by the dome when it was soft. We looked at bending soft material over a dome and saw what the impact of that would be. From there we moved on to the African erosion surface, a massive flat plain extending over much of Africa and widely recognized. We looked at a panorama from various areas around the Witwatersrand, seeing a uniform horizon, a level horizon, with the same characteristics all over the Witwatersrand. Noting here a slight curvature of the Earth, but the horizon is uniformly level. We noticed that the spot heights around the Witwatersrand were remarkably uniform, and that it would require major feat of engineering to achieve that level of uniformity. We noted that this indicated a massive planing action by some external force, not something that could happen gradually over millions or billions of years. We looked at the art of plane and level, what it takes to produce level concrete slabs, for that matter level cakes, or rectangular and level furniture. We noted that it required specialist tools, and that to produce large level surfaces required a large uniform grading mechanism. We postulated that this grading mechanism could have been massive tsunami waves ripping around the planet uniformly, cutting down layer upon layer. From there we looked at the valleys incised into the dome. We saw that the dome was not a uniform level surface, but in fact that there were valleys gouged into it, huge volumes of material eroded. We noticed that the valleys in themselves were broad and gently sloping, and that this was not consistent with the volume of water flowing in those streams. We noted that gentle rain does nothing. It is all about high velocity water, and we looked at how the use of a water cannon in hydraulic mining moved huge volumes of material very rapidly. We looked at plucked cliff faces around South Africa and noticed that huge blocks of rock had just been plucked out of these cliff faces and were nowhere to be seen. We noticed that on top of the hills we also had similar plucking, huge chunks of rock remaining, but other chunks of rock just disappeared. What should have been uniform deposits, uniform layers, anything but uniform. We asked the question, where is all the rock gone? Because the slope is downhill all the way to the sea, and suggested that at the very least this material had to have been deposited in the low-lying areas of Limpopo province, if not in the Mozambique Channel, and that in addition to this, the material all had to have been removed through the Hartbeespoort Dam Gorge. All of this consistent with huge hydraulic action. We looked at the characteristics of erosion of a small river with a limited bed load cutting a deep channel versus a large bed load cutting a wide flat valley, and we suggested that it was only possible to have cut the valleys that we have in the Witwatersrand around Johannesburg by huge volumes of material traveling at huge velocity. We concluded that the rock was not removed by ice, it did not evaporate, it did not dissolve, and it can only have been eroded by massive water suction resulting from extremely high velocity, possibly coupled with boiling water if the cutting back took place while the granite was still in a semi-molten state. We asked how this could happen. We noted that continental separation was a well-accepted reality with the continents fitting together. We noted that conventional theory says this took place gradually, but from a mechanical point of view, it must have happened rapidly. We noted, in terms of the coefficient of thermal expansion, that if the crust of the Earth had been hot and cooled, that splitting of the crust was almost certain when subjected to very cold water from an ice object. We suggested that the continental separation and the water drainage that would result if this happened rapidly was totally consistent with the landforms that we see all over the planet. We suggested that the trenches like the Mariana Trench were consistent with rapid drainage, and we noted that the sea volume is 18 times the land volume, and therefore it didn't require very much adjustment for the water to come off the land. We looked at the reality that the Earth is on an inclined axis and that the Earth has an elliptical orbit around the Sun, and suggested that the flypast or impact of a space object could easily have twisted the Earth on its axis and adjusted its orbit, and that both of these would have caused massive surface disruption as the Earth's crust rotated, leaving the liquid core behind, creating huge friction and forces which would easily have separated the continents. We then looked at the age of all of this. We looked at the dilemma of the God's Word phenomenon, people who use the Bible as a truncheon to beat people into belief, and we looked at the reverse problem of people who use intellectualism to beat people into belief with absolutely contrasting and conflicting theories. We looked at the problem of the clean, sharp corners of the rocks on top of the hills and concluded that it was unlikely that these rocks had been standing there for millions, let alone billions of years. We then examined the ancient book of Genesis, which purports to provide a historical account of a flood and a ship built by a man called Noah, which landed in the mountains of Ararat in Turkey. We reported that that ship has been found submerged in a mud flow with dimensions that exactly agree with the Genesis account and situated in a location that exactly agrees with the Genesis account. We reported that modeling of that, what had been found, indicated that the vessel was completely capable of withstanding the sort of flood event that we were talking about, albeit extremely uncomfortably. Given that we had such a close correlation with the Genesis account, we made the suggestion that Genesis is a broadly reliable historical text, and that we could at least place some reliance on the approximate dating arrived at in Genesis. We also looked at the genealogies in Genesis and found that they correlated with Irish genealogies, and we also found that Egyptian timelines supported the dating of a flood around about 2345 before Common Era or before Christ. We noted also that the technology inherent in the Great Pyramid was more advanced than we have today. We looked at other complications, evidence of a global nuclear war about 4,000 years ago, which would have corrupted any steady-state nuclear decay theory, and also explained Australopithecus and other cavemen as being deformed fugitives from a nuclear war. We postulated that total destruction of the surface of the Earth gave a completely new spin to global warming, explained the rising of sea levels and the drowning of cities, explained that all races traced their origin from a single family, that evolution over millions of years was invalid. We looked at the question of what is the origin and purpose of man and referred to a document which is on the CD at the end of this set. From there we moved on to signs of judgment. We noted that Genesis also claimed that the flood was a result of a judgment by the Creator, Yah, the eternally self-existing, commonly referred to as the Lord, who said, "I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth." We saw also in the book of Exodus an account of a judgment on the army of Egypt, and seen that that had also been found with chariot wheels and human and horse body parts, skeletons on the floor of the Red Sea, where Exodus said it would be. We saw that Sodom and Gomorrah that Sodom and Gomorrah would turn to ash by brimstone in Genesis, and that those had been found in exactly where Genesis said they would be, also as a judgment by the Almighty. We found the split rock at Horeb and the fire-blackened mountain described in Exodus, again where Exodus says it will be. Fire-blackened mountain where the Almighty descended and spoke to the people and gave them the 10 laws, the first one of which is, "I am Yah, the eternally self-existing, your mighty one who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other mighty ones before me." And we looked briefly at the other commandments. We noted that Moses was allegedly given 2 tablets of stone with these 10 commandments written on them, which he placed in a container which he called the Ark of the Covenant, which was subsequently elaborately gilded with gold, and which disappeared about 597 BC. We noted that Ark of the Covenant had been found in 1982 by Ron Wyatt, and that this was under an execution site which corresponded very closely with biblical accounts. And we noted that this correlated with the accounts of the death of a man called Yeshua, the anointed of Yah, or Jesus Christ, as you may know him. We noted that this was an extremely powerful confirmation of earlier writings, and that it was strong evidence of judgment to come. And so we concluded that we found numerous signs of judgment in the past: the flood and the ship of Noah, the fire-blackened mountain, the execution site with the earthquake crack, the Ark of the Covenant with blood on the mercy seat containing the tablets of stone with the 10 laws engraved on them, and suggested that this formed a basis for careful introspection and self-examination. We then looked at indications of coming judgment in the book of Revelation, which said that anyone not found written in the book of life would be cast into the lake of fire, and other verses which speak of being cast into the lake of fire. We concluded that with all the billions of suns that have been detected in the universe, eternal hellfire is entirely possible. We also noted that it was claimed that there were great rewards, including sitting on a high throne with Yeshua for eternity. We posed the question, where will you spend eternity, and referred to the document which is on the CD as part of this DVD set. We then asked the question, where did the water come from and where did it go? We looked again at that dirty snowball in space and postulated that one of those could have flown by the planet, dropping chunks of ice which melted and formed rain, or else that one might have collided with the planet. We looked at the ice object that had seemingly struck Mars and noted that that was more than sufficient water to completely drown the planet. We noted the disruption of the surface of the Earth that would have happened if the Earth had tilted on its axis. So to wrap up, my conclusions. Is the planet inherently internally unstable, that all of this could just have happened? Or is the planet stable except when impacted by external forces? Was there an impact or near miss by a comet or other astronomical object? Is our universe stable or unstable? Do we exist in an environment of unplanned, unmanaged, progressive, self-inventing evolution? Or do we exist in a context of an environment that is subject to a higher creative agency, an engineer, a creator? Will we live the rest of our lives as we please with no consequences? Or is there a day of judgment where we will all be called to account for the way we've lived our lives? Is there a penalty for failure, a lake of fire? Are there thrones in a place of great beauty which are a reward for faithful service to the Creator? Are there places in between? Does it matter how we live? I ask you to draw an engineering conclusion. What makes sense to you? Please weigh up all I've shown you and all I've said. Please do not decide based on a whim or what someone else has said. You're an intelligent being. Exercise your intellect to understand the issues and make an informed choice. Make a rational, practical decision, one that you're willing to defend no matter what, something you can hang your hat on. Do you choose to live life at the throw of a dice, or do you design against failure and have a robust view of where you're going? Steady-state theories cannot explain what we've seen in this video. Massive external forces have to have been applied. A massive external source of water seems essential. There are large chunks of ice in space. An astronomical object or ice comet seems to explain the situation. Is there a better theory? I don't know one. What do you think? Was there a flood? Did the flood just happen? Was there a judgment? Will there be another judgment? Where will you spend eternity? My conclusion: there was a massive hydraulic and tectonic event. It was triggered by an externally generated instability. It took place relatively recently. There is a creator. There's looming judgment, possibly within 1,000 years or much sooner. The 10 Commandments will form the basis of judgment. We each have a choice, which ranges from eternal hellfire to a high throne for eternity. What do you choose today? In the endnotes, you will find a variety of information that has a bearing on what you might do once you've considered this information. A high-level explanation of various religious spiritual principles that it is important to know about. Please watch this section as well and read the documents that are contained in the CD that accompanies this DVD. Some acknowledgements: Jonathan Gray for his information and material, Ron Wyatt, who found many of the key archaeological finds referred to here, my parents, my children, others who have been involved in my life. People who've supplied material in various shapes and forms. Particular thanks to Fritz Holscher and Still Point Country Haven for their venue, which is really nice if you'd like to use it. Dave Haraway, who took the photographs. I can be contacted at james@etimin.org or at any of the contact details that are on the screen. Jonathan Gray can also be contacted. I would like to dedicate this presentation to our Creator, the Lord, more accurately referred to as Yah, the eternally self-existing, who is the reason for our existence and the source of our being, and who desires our fellowship with Himself for eternity, in whom we live and move and have our being. May Yah, the eternally self-existing, make His face to shine upon you and give you His peace. It's been said that if you do not act on new information within 48 hours, you probably never will. I suggest that right now you write down your top 3 action points before you move on. Make sure that your theory of geological and topographic formation and your religious beliefs are like a bridge, designed not to fail.